introduce myself. My name is Monique Ryan. I'm the Independent Federal Member for Kooyong, and it's an incredible pleasure to represent an electorate that has such a commitment to climate action. We also just acknowledge, firstly, the traditional owners of the land, and I know that we all feel very grateful for living in a part of the world which is so incredibly beautiful, but in so many ways so very fortunate. I'd also like to congratulate the organisers of today's event, also the sponsors of the event, the City of Burundara, and I think for many of us who've seen this event grow over the last 3 years, the incredible efforts of the Electrify Burundara volunteer team have been really magnified, I think, in the last couple of years by the extraordinary support from Sophie and the rest of the team in the City of Burundara, both in the councillors group but also the staff, and we're really, really grateful for their support. We have 3 incredible speakers today. Very grateful to them for the generosity in joining us. The first is Elizabeth Molyneux, who is the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action in the Victorian State Government. Elizabeth has approaching 30 years of experience in the energy sector, and she's a strategic leader in policy and governance. Her work bridges government, industry and community, and it's all about making energy affordable and accessible. So thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us today. Alan Kohler really needs no introduction because he lives just up the road and he's on our TVs every day, but he is one of Australia's most respected financial journalists and economic commentators. He's been in the media for over 5 decades. Oh, that can't be right. No, it is right. ABC News, The New Daily and The Fit. Was that, sorry?
97.
No, he's 97. No, he's 90s. But kept young by the power of electrification. He's known for cutting through complexity to explain how household batteries, energy pricing and climate policy affect everyday Australians. And I can tell you, every time he writes a really interesting editorial, something like that, people contact my office and say, why aren't we doing that? So it's very true. He brings a strong, sharp lens to the economic realities of the energy transition and has reminded us on many occasions, while the pathway to net zero is necessary, it's far from simple, and we're really grateful to him for giving us his time today. Alan Kohler. And finally, Saul Griffith, an electrification visionary. Now, Saul and I have agreed that there will be a prize at the end of the day for the best electrification pun, and I believe that I have the power to kick that off. Saul, but he said, I won't use yours, you can use yours. Okay. Saul is the founder of Rewiring America and Rewiring Australia, which are 2 non-profit organisations which are driving the transition from clean energy through household electrification. He has a PhD from MIT and a MacArthur Genius Grant under his belt. He has advised NASA, DARPA and the White House, and he's written really influential books which have, I think, inspired many of us, like Electrify and The Big Switch. So his mission is to empower everyday Australians to lead the charge in decarbonising our homes, communities and economy, one plug at a time. Thank you for coming and joining us today, Saul. So the idea of today's session is to talk about the fossil fuel transition, where we are now and how well advanced we are along the path to energy transition, what the roadblocks are and what we can do personally and what we can push our local governments, our state government and our federal government to do as well. And so the idea is how we talk about how we shift from burning fossil fuels through renewable energy. And I think we're hoping to have a real focus on the individual step at a personal and local level. So each of our panellists is going to speak on that for a few minutes, and then we're going to have a period of questions, and then we will have some time for audience participation, Q&A at the end. So you operate on the international stage. You know what the global drivers and trends are towards the transition, the energy transition. You're also very much in the picture with some of the immediate challenges that we've had in a geopolitical way in recent months and years, and you can certainly speak to your experience in the US. So I think in terms of how the US experience is playing out on the world stage in terms of the global energy transition, and how Australia can act to try and play its own role and to facilitate that transition as best it can. Could you just give us a few minutes about those sorts of issues and what your experiences have been recently?
Absolutely. First, I should say I'm really energized to be here. The atmosphere is truly electric, and it feels like a privilege to speak to the resistance that are here today, resisting fossil fuels.
I was going to say you're on fire, but that would be inappropriate in this moment.
Yeah, that was good. So I just got back from the US, actually. I went to Climate Week in New York. It is extraordinary to see the about face in energy policy in the US. I don't think Australians really appreciate just how diabolical it is. 2/3-ish of the Biden IRA has been overturned. It was largely considered Trump-proof. People thought the money, once it had gone out the door, meaning had been assigned to projects, would be locked in. That turns out not to be true. My own organisation is a great example. Rewiring America, after working on policy, we were actually invited to build a consortium to decarbonise low and middle income communities in America. We got a $2 billion contract with the Environmental Protection Agency to do that work. Week one of the White House, they froze our privately held bank account. This is a bank account for a consortium that included Habitat for Humanity. You might know them. They build low-income homes, prospect homes. So we had this consortium. They froze our bank account. Injunction, it opened again. Then they froze it again. Injunction, opened it again. This will manifest probably in a Supreme Court case about federal overreach. The freezing our bank account process didn't work, so then they actually cancelled our Treasury contract. That's probably another Supreme Court case. All of these things are, so that's a pretty bad story. So that's all of that work is dead, and we're a sort of the median climate environmental group in the US. So it's a bloodbath. So the mood in Climate Week New York for the non-profit and the activism sector is just dire, because everyone's under FBI investigation or has had their contracts cancelled, or etc. So the ideological tilt is incredible. I think the geopolitics is pretty extraordinary. I don't know if I'm a bit of an American politics tragic. It's like watching horror/movies at the moment. Day 2 of the White House, the new administration, or should I say the new regime, not a lot of people remember this, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with his counterparty from Russia in Saudi Arabia at MBS's palace. He's a journalist. MBS is the guy who kills American journalists for fun. And the topic of conversation is how much money America would have made if they went into a consortium with Russia selling natural gas around the world. And if you really want to understand a huge amount about the geopolitics, this administration, sort of the silent partner that isn't getting, because it's such a horror show, you forget, but the silent partner is the natural gas and oil industry. If you think about the tariffs, Europe's tariff was reduced when they promised to buy $750 billion worth of American natural gas. They're holding this over Taiwan, they're holding this over Japan. We'll give you a discount on your tariffs if you promise to buy American natural gas. So the IRA was the very naive climate movement's effort to, we won a victory over gas, not realizing that their revenge fantasy would be this overwhelming. It's pretty dire over there. I think what this really means is we're just going to have to beat gas on its merits if we wish to counter it, and that means economic merits. We live in Australia. Gas is a little bit more expensive here than the US. We have much cheaper electricity here, so the economics for households to get off gas is pretty much a slam dunk in every household in Australia. It's not quite true in America because sadly, while we got America to believe in electrifying everything, we forgot to make electricity cheap. So Australians are lucky. I'm putting a 16 kilowatt solar on my house in Wollongong, and it's going to cost me, sorry to use US cents, but I'm thinking in US headlines, 45 US cents a watt. I just got a 16 kilowatt on my office in San Francisco, and it was $3.60 a watt. So 8 or 9 times. And because you don't have that cheap rooftop solar component, because they have vertical utility monopolies that are not allowing, they have even worse energy companies than Australia does. Americans are watching the electricity price go up, so the economics of doing it at a household level isn't working. So that's the peculiar American story. They need to fix that. Globally, however, we're crushing it. Australia, New Zealand, most of Asia, Africa, the economics are just in favour of electrification now. China, absolutely. China is, when I wrote Electrify, I was hoping that Biden would be the Churchill or the Roosevelt of the energy transition, but it turns out that Xi Jinping is filling that role, right? Very unpopular. You can't say that in America right now. It's bipartisan consensus is China is evil. We have to beat them at AI. We have to do all this stuff. Whereas, I lost an argument that I tried to have with American senators that, America can build it. China can build it, America can finance it, and the world wins, and we all win. But they wanted to make it about industrial policy, so that seems bad. Anyway, I think that's good news for us. The other good news is, just to give one example, I'm working with an American company. They're longtime friends of mine. They have a process to make iron using only electricity, uses less energy than the existing ways to make iron, and if you have the price of renewables in Australia as feeding that, will make iron cheaper than natural gas can, straight up. And natural gas, their primary market is electricity generation and heavy industry. And if you can beat them there, then I think we're going to pull the rug out underneath the investability of gas companies, and we need that to happen as fast as possible. So actually, I think Australia's role in the transition now is to prove that out at scale as quickly as possible. Otherwise, the gas industry is going to drive the bus.
Thanks, Saul. And I think that really speaks, one of those issues is that it speaks to the social licence of the renewal, because many of us have experienced the constant pushback from the conservative side of politics around the commercial possibilities and the competitiveness of renewables as opposed to fossil fuels. And what we constantly hear, I can tell you, at a federal level in Parliament is the fact that this myth around fossil fuel generated energy being cheaper than energy that comes from renewables, which brings us to you, Elizabeth. And I think the Victorian state government has really taken the lead nationally in many ways on the energy transition. And it's been great to see some of the innovations that the Victorian government has led. I think perhaps you could talk to us about that. And potentially, if you could, give us an idea of how, I know you are always experiencing the same sort of pushback regarding that energy transition that we see at a federal level. Maybe you could just give us an overview of what the Victorian government's been able to achieve, what the impact of that has been on households, and what the cost and benefit of that has looked like.
Thanks, Mon. But it's lovely to be here to speak to you in my bureaucratic capacity. Vic, the benefit of Australia, I think, is that we do have a federal system and we do have state systems, and energy, by and large, is governed by the state system. So it's a true federation. And in some ways, that does give Australia a bit more protection. Means that climate priorities can ebb and flow, but in a mosaic across that federation. So it gives a little bit more protection, perhaps. And I think we've seen that over the past perhaps 15 years or so. So Victoria does have some pretty ambitious targets. I'm the energy person in the Victorian government. The energy targets, we've got renewable energy targets of 95% renewable penetration into our grid by 2035. And this year our target was 40%, and we've already hit 42%. So we're sort of on the way. The big ticket items, of course, will be closing the coal stations in a timely manner, but we're seeing the renewable penetration, really take off and increase. So that's on the generation side. we're sort of talking about, well, how do we use it? How do we use our energy in Victoria, and what's the best use of it? Which brings us to electrification. If we have to talk about electrification, we obviously have to talk about gas. Victoria has been a huge supplier of gas into the eastern seaboard for decades. Victoria still uses more gas than any other state. About 80% of our households are dual fuel, and we have industry and, of course, gas-fired power generation, and they all are users of gas. And Victorian economy has benefited from that because it has been cheap and abundant, but neither of those things hold going forward. It's no longer cheap, might be cheaper than America, but it's no longer as cheap as it was, and it won't be in the future. And the Bass Strait reserves are running low, so those fields will be progressively, those wellheads will be turned off. And any new gas that comes into the system will be at a higher price, which does leave households and businesses exposed to that higher price. So it's sort of obvious that we need to make the shift. And to Saul's point, it is a bit of a lay down misere that electrification is the answer here. It will cut emissions, but it will also make cost of living, tackle some cost of living and make energy bills across businesses and households cheaper. So from a policy point of view, the Victorian government launched this thing called the Gas Substitution Roadmap in 2022. It's published every year. And essentially what that is, it's the plan to reduce gas use in Victoria over time. So each year we publish it and we put out new policies to gradually turn this Titanic around, and the Titanic being how we use gas in Victoria around. It will be gradual. We're chipping away at it. So June this year, following lots of stakeholder engagement, we announced new building electrification and efficiency standards and regulations. So they cover things like all new homes and commercial buildings to be all electric from January 2027. I'll just pause here too. The reason why 2027 might seem a long time away is you do need to give industry time to retool and reintroduce the supply chain for electric appliances. So you do need to give a little bit of time. We've given just over the minimum 12-month requirement. New homes will be all electric. Gas hot water heating appliances in existing homes have to be replaced with electric ones when that appliance fails. So again, trying to be pragmatic here. If you can repair it, that's fine. But if you can't repair it and you need a new appliance, then you're not allowed to get gas. You'll have to get an electric appliance. In Victoria, we have new minimum energy efficiency rental standards. They're going to be phased in from March 2027 as well. They build on some existing minimum standards such as 2-star heating standards and so forth. But these new rental standards will cover, they sort of try and introduce really cost-effective measures for cutting energy waste. So they're introducing ceiling insulation, draft proofing, low-flow shower heads, which also have energy implications, and energy-efficient hot water. So these standards also require gas heating and hot water systems to be replaced, again, with electric at the end of their life. Just making sure that the renters, who are often slightly more vulnerable than homeowners, don't miss out on those benefits of electrification. VicGov's committed to all new government buildings being electrified. So that's schools, hospitals, police stations. They're all going to be constructed as all electric. And then you get to, well, how do households electrify? What's the help that's needed to get people over the line? And often it's that upfront cost of appliances. So there's discounts available to households and businesses through our Victorian Energy Upgrades program. There is a stall in the hall today. And these just help give a rebate for those upfront costs of the all-electric appliances, such as induction cooktops, reverse cycle air conditioners and heat pumps. And again, we've tried to make how you do that more accessible as well. And the SEC has a website. But really, it's these sort of events today that we need to more of, I think, across the community to really help people see the reality of it rather than just a website, which is, of course, is very useful. So that's sort of on the household side. And then that will drive a lot of electrification, therefore a lot of electricity demand into the grid. So we have an even bigger job to make sure we hit our renewable electricity targets and making sure the grid stays stable, because there's a lot of solar that comes into the grid in the middle of the day. So that's the other part, the other side here, making sure that the grid stays reliable with, making sure there's energy storage projects, batteries, to help balance those supply and demand fluctuations. Often it's the bill that might get people over the line. And whilst we do have low energy prices compared to the States, people are still struggling with their energy bills here. Gas bills are huge at the moment, and electricity bills, people feel that they're pretty high. But if you do electrify, there are significant savings to be had. And then if you put solar on top, there's even more savings. Our calculations are that if you take an existing home with solar panels, switch from gas to electricity, you can save around $2,000 a year on your bill. There's a real economic benefit, and that's what's going to bring the pull through, I think, of electrification, plus your health benefits and plus your emissions. But people feel that quarterly bill.
Alan, you're the economist, and you've been very vocal in recent years around the financial case for the energy transition. At a federal level, we hear a lot about the cost of that transition, and personally, I think that the Albanese government hasn't been very good at addressing such costs as there is and addressing the pretty niggly, nasty, small-minded questions that the Conservative side are constantly throwing them around, the energy prices and electricity bills and things like that. How do we change the conversation to the benefits of that renewable transition from an economic lens? I wouldn't mind if you would be grateful if you could talk to the audience about the effect of electrification and home efficiency modifications on housing values, which is something close to the heart of all people who live in Burrendara.
I think about 40% of Australia's households have rooftop solar now. That's great. Electrification is happening, as both Saul and Elizabeth say, because it's cheaper to use electricity for cooking for a while. It's now cheaper to use it for heating. I think the problem at the government level is twofold. One is that the governments in general just are doing the easy things. Electrification is easy because, it's cheaper, obviously. There's a lot of things that are hard. Like a lot of people with solar panels on their roof will fly to Europe and burn quite a lot of aviation fuel. Aviation is hard. It's, there's no real way of having battery-driven planes yet. Shipping is really hard. The three main materials of our life are concrete, steel, and plastics. Replacing those or making them in such a way that there's no emissions is really hard. The government is not really tackling the hard things yet. It's just doing easy stuff. And what's more, it's requiring the private sector to do it. And also the other thing is having a target, which is what the governments all around the world are doing who signed up to Paris, except now the United States, which has pulled out of Paris. Everyone in Paris in 2015 made a commitment to have targets, which were to be updated every 5 years, and the Australian government's new target for 2035 now came out. It's 62 to 70% reduction in emissions. They're a long way off achieving that, really. I mean, and the problem with having a target is that just the existence of the target tends to suggest, firstly, that we're going to meet it, and secondly, if we make the target, we'll be fine. But just having the target, and they kind of talk about how it's an ambitious target, but it's achievable, and we'll be right. Firstly, Australia's target is kind of in the global context of global emissions is more or less meaningless. We've got to have it, we've got to do it, but it's not going to make any difference to the climate. If all current global pledges are met, the global temperature will warm by 2 degrees, which was, in fact, and Saul saying upwards, I agree, 2.5, maybe 3 degrees. And I'd urge everybody in the room, really, to go home and Google what 2.5 or 3 degrees actually will be like. Because it's really bad. Like there's no Great Barrier Reef anymore. You probably can't live in any of the floodplains in northern New South Wales. Certainly, if you want insurance, you can't live there. I mean, I think that the big problem is going to be insurance. A lot of Australia will be uninsurable, and a lot of other places in Australia, the insurance will become really expensive. So what the government's not talking about is what is it going to do about insurance? I mean, I do think that at the moment, we have a health insurance scheme called Medicare, which is to help people who can't afford private health insurance. And that pays part of go to the GP and so on. We've got public hospitals. I just think that the government's going to have to, at some point, have some kind of Medicare scheme for general insurance. I can't see how it's going to be avoided because it's just going to be unaffordable. At 2 degrees, or certainly 2.5 degrees, the sea level rises by about 1 metre. That means you can't really live within about 2 metres of sea level. And I think about 250 to 300 million people in the world live at 2 metres above sea level. Well, they're going to have to go somewhere else. I mean, where are they going to go? I mean, so look, I think the problem, the whole problem at the moment with the kind of climate change policies is that it's all assumed, it's presumed that it will be prevented. The whole thing is we've got these targets, we're going to make the targets and we'll be fine. But not only will we not make the targets, even if we did, we wouldn't be fine. So I think that the focus needs to be that. And just before I hand over, the one really good thing, the really optimistic thing that I've been looking into lately, and I've got a column on tomorrow's ABC website about this subject, is fusion energy. Now, fusion has been this kind of physicist's fantasy now for, 50 years. The International Atomic Energy Agency started having meetings about it in 1961. Tomorrow in Chengdu in China is the 30th such meeting. Fusion energy has always been 30 years away. It's now 5 years away. Commonwealth Fusion Systems, which appears to be one of the leading companies doing that. Sam says I've got no idea about any of this, but Sam reckons it's 5 years off. Saul says no.
They're my mates from MIT.
Right.
So I talk to them a lot. They're 5 years away from breaking even, but they don't know how to actually contain the heat. There's a fusion startup in my office in San Francisco making fuels. I know too much about it. I am optimistic. There's 10 groups around the world that will make net positive power, but none of them know how to make a power plant.
Right.
So there's still one remaining problem, and no one mentions it, which is we can't contain the heat. So they intone this idea that we're going to have a liquid metal curtain. So you're going to have a little fusion reactor, and to contain the radiation and to contain the heat, you can't have a real world material. So they're going to have a liquid metal, like a bubbler of molten metal flowing around this thing.
Like Terminator 2.
Yeah, literally, but we don't know how to build it. The cool thing is that you can actually, if that's made out of mercury, the liquid metal curtain, then the mercury slowly transforms into gold while you're running your fusion reactor. I shit you not, this is true. And Adam, the guy who's running a fusion startup out of basement, he just published this a few weeks ago. The value of the gold is worth more than the energy created in the fusion, especially now. And the gold is only reactive for 22 years, radioactive. So if you could sell 22-year futures in gold as a side product, but we still don't know how to make a practical reactor.
Right.
So I would still caution.
Okay, all right. There's a company in Sydney called HB11 which says you can contain the plasma, which is 100 million degrees.
We contain the plasma
with lasers. No, this company in Sydney is trying to do it with lasers, and they reckon they can do it. Anyway.
Elizabeth, I'm going to come back to you.
Not on fusion, I hope.
No, on fusion. No, that's okay. What about the challenges of dealing with, the complexities of dealing with the federal government and local governments around the sorts of changes that the Victorian state government's been trying to advance? And maybe you could just speak to some of the challenges we're talking about regarding political uncertainty and how that can impact decision making at a local and a state level.
If you're going through an energy transition, so we've got, like traditionally we've had some big coal plants with big transmission lines going to Melbourne and other load centres, and it's pretty basic stuff. And we're transitioning to the lowest cost capital generation, which is renewables, and you've got all sorts of energy coming back from households through solar PVs and controllable appliances coming back into the grid. So all of a sudden you're changing from this old-fashioned linear system to this dispersed, integrated, meshed energy grid system. Very, very much more complex. So you're going through a really big transition. The big coal stations are coming to the end of life, and whenever you believe that is, but it's not going to. They're not there forever. Energy is such a political issue. And when I started in energy, there were 3 articles that would appear in the paper maybe a week or a fortnight. And these days, the media clips from the energy sector go on for pages and pages and pages. It's really important to have the democracy in play, but having energy policy flip and flop, which is what we've seen in America and what we might see here, is very challenging to push through with an energy transition plan in a sustainable way. So that's probably an obvious thing to say, but it is a challenging thing to make policy stick. And it goes back to what I was saying before with at least Australia having that mosaic of governments that can either be in competition with each other or aligned with each other going forward. The energy sector, the ministers and the Commonwealth Government meet regularly, and probably it's not visible, but there's a lot of things that they agree on. So there is a lot of agreement between all the different states and the Commonwealth on various energy policy matters. When we see governments change, we do see policies change. We've seen it in Queensland recently, where the push to renewables has not quite been reversed, but certainly slowed down a great deal. The challenge is essentially if there's an obvious thing you can do, like electrification, that will push through on the basis of economics. Where it becomes challenging is where governments actually need to underwrite investment in innovation and technology, which is, and where, how do they pick the areas to underwrite in? And that's what the policy contest becomes.
You've actually touched on one of the really difficult pieces here, which is that when you look at the information about what things will look like if we don't make the transition, it's absolutely terrifying. I've seen the Office of National Intelligence report, which the federal government will not release because it's so terrifying. And basically it paints the picture. It's similar to the climate impact report that was released a couple of weeks ago, but worse because it's not redacted. And it paints the picture of what will happen if we don't make that transition. And it's basically the pathway on which we are now, which is the population of Bangladesh coming to Australia in a situation where the northern third of Australia is uninhabitable. And our seas are rising, the land is heating, industrial yields are down, infectious diseases are migrating, and we can't, as you say, we can't, insure our homes, but, also you can't insulate your homes effectively, and that's having immediate impacts on all of us. So that's the future if we don't act. It's very clear. As a politician, you can't tell that to people every day because they just run away screaming. And the Conservative side of politics say you're frightening the children, you're a bad person. As a politician, I think we have to try to communicate to people the urgency of the situation in a way that will generate positive action rather than just frightening the children. Part of that has to be an ongoing communication with the people who you represent, but it also has to be an ongoing communication with governments at a federal, state and local level, and with the private stakeholders who are driving much of this because the governments have been unable to or unwilling to. How do you communicate that with people? There's a balance basically between trying to communicate the urgency while not being perceived as alarmist. And that's something that I think that you do very, very well. Can you speak to that for the audience?
Well, look, to be honest, I'm a bit alarmist, I guess. So I'm not entirely doing the best the best thing. But look, I do think that the one brilliant thing that the fossil fuel industry did quite a while ago was to turn the whole subject into a right versus left argument. And that was helped by Rupert Murdoch deciding that this was a good way to make money. We've got people in the media, particularly Rupert Murdoch and his whole organisation, have discovered that you can make a lot of money by pushing the fossil fuel line simply because it's telling people, a lot of people, what they want to hear, which is that you don't have to do anything because it's all bullshit. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And that's kind of a good thing to hear. So they're making money out of it. But the trouble is that the politicians aren't making money out of it. They're just peddling the line because they think that it's a way to get elected. So we have Andrew Hastie, for example, quitting the Liberal Party front bench and saying that he wants to abandon net zero by 2050. And so, it's incredible how it's still going on. I mean, to be honest, I have no idea how to deal with this. I mean, it's just incredibly persistent. And I suppose I wonder at what point will governments around the world decide that it's an emergency? Like in wartime, they take control of the media. They actually decide what gets published.
Well, they did just declare a Department of War, and it does look like they took control of the media.
Well, and Trump is declaring more emergencies than any previous president, and using emergencies, but he's using them to enhance his power, not to do anything else. I mean, Elizabeth's right. The problem is we've got democracy, and the reason Xi Jinping is the Franklin Roosevelt of the transition is because they're an autocracy. He can have a policy going for decades, and it's not going to flip around. And they decided ages ago, like Rupert Murdoch, to make money out of it. I mean, China is. I don't think they are ideologically aligned on climate change. They're just deciding to exploit the transition. So they've become the world's leading producer of solar panels and wind turbines and batteries and magnets and rare earths, you name it, they're doing it. I mean, we're just surrounded by cynicism.
All right, so before we go to questions, I lied. I'm going to go to one more question to you, Saul. So we have a situation where, Alan mentioned Andrew Hastie. We have a number of Conservative leaders who are fighting for the opportunity to lead their party, if there is a party, to defeat in 2028 and 2031. The Conservative side of politics in Australia is an absolute rabble. So we have a Labor government which purports to believe in climate change and which purports to have an ambition to address it, which then comes out with targets which are manifestly inadequate.
I think you're asking yourself a question here.
Well, no, I'm not. And is committed to gas to 2075 and beyond in the face of all of the science and the evidence. You've seen what plays out in the States. What do we do, knowing that the Conservative side of politics has largely abdicated this?
They've even abandoned traditional conservative economics.
Yeah.
And so their argument and questions to Labor are about the cost of the transition. But as Alan and I have both been championing, if you think of it as investment in return, if every Australian household follows the world-class advice, so when I'm on the world stage, I literally intone Victorian energy policy as one of the best places in the world. So thank you. But if everyone followed this advice, replace your appliances when they go, replace your next car with an electric car when they go, Australia would save $1 trillion by 2050. So macroeconomically, it's a slam dunk, but we haven't had an Australian... No one from Labor has stood up to the Liberal Party attacks on it's going to cost us, as with the simple statement, no, it's going to save us. And the Northwest Shelf and the gas stuff, extremely cynical. I don't really understand Labor's gas policy, except that Western Australia feels like Texas and is really feels Republican but votes Labor. I don't understand it. Then I think you have to have like a long arc of history approach to this, and you can say the things that are simple and true. For everyone in this audience and for everyone, Australian households, I need everyone to panic about climate change. It's just as bad or maybe even worse than Alan says. It does look like we're now barreling to at least 2.5, if not 3+ degrees. Trump probably has going to cost us a half a degree, just in backsliding, because he's a whole bunch of other oil producers are following. That was the point about the Saudi and Russian. They're the 3 largest fossil fuel producers in the world. So that's really crap. But what you can individually do is addresses half of the emissions in the world. And that is when the 6 appliances that you own that burn fossil fuels die, upgrade to electric, and half of your emissions are done. I've been encouraging that for the last decade because they're the things that work economically now, because you're competing against retail gas, not against wholesale gas. That's to say, because we don't yet have the technologies to do the hard things, which is what Alan said. That's not true. I was in the US for a couple of weeks just now. I got 2 sets of mates who have an all-electric pathway to cement with completely zero emission. I got multiple sets of mates doing it for iron, so we now have it for iron, and we have it for cement. Plastics is complicated. Hopefully we use less of them. I even have a friend who quit his job at NASA to go and work for an electrofuels startup, so they're going to synthesize aviation fuels starting with electricity and carbon dioxide. So all of those things, if we were running this, like if we were using wartime emergency powers to run these like Manhattan projects, you could land all of those planes in 5 years at scale. So technically now there is no longer hard to decarbonize sector if you're me. Like, if I have the good fortune of looking at the best teams in the world and they're sort of my colleagues, so scientifically and engineering wise we can now hit it. We could do it. The problem is that governments like our own don't yet realize that. They don't have the confidence to make those investments. The gas industry has more lobbyists in Canberra in state offices than anywhere else in the world I see. This is a confused set of points, but the point being is we now know what to do individually. That's half. And then the other half is politics, which is your job. And I think we only win the politics if we create a better story, right? And we're still backpedaling from a 50-year environmentalist story of if we all suffer just a little bit more, we'll be slightly less fucked. And we need a better story. Like, here is better health outcomes, better economic outcomes. We know how to do it. We need to be techno-optimistic again because people want to imagine that the future is going to be better. It's extraordinary that America has lost its techno-optimism, except for AI, which is going to ruin our children. I don't know.
Also use a lot of electricity, AI.
They do.
Sam Altman in the last week has purchased, they don't even measure data centers in information anymore. They measure them in gigawatts. So Sam Altman has ordered 20 gigawatts worth of chips from NVIDIA and the other company in the last week. That is 5% of US electricity. That's half of Australia's.
Did you want to say something, Elizabeth?
Yes,
I've got a question.
Yes, we've gone to data centres, which is another vexed topic, but I might just come back. As well as looking at our own appliances and electrifying, and this isn't in my speaking notes, but the other thing is making sure the finance that finances all the projects is incentivised to fund the greener projects rather than the fossil projects. So there is ability through superannuation lobbying or just direct lobbying of whoever you're a shareholder of. The banks are falling off the net zero path. We've seen that start in the States. And I think making sure that the banks that are still on that commitment to net zero are incentivised by their shareholders, by their account holders, by their superannuation investors, maintain that commitment is also going to be critical. Goes back to your insurance point too, Alan. I think the financial sector is a big play here, and to maintain what is left of their commitment is going to be super important.
Thank you. The issue, Alan, my first degree was nuclear physics, and it's always been 50 years away for fusion. So looking right here and now, we've got the solar, we've got it dirt cheap. In fact, City Power just told me they're going to continue their solar soap tariff for another 5 years, which is giving it away, all you can need for free in the middle of the day. So as you said, Elizabeth, the problem of storage, obviously, if they're doing that for another 5 years, it's not going to be solved commercially quickly. We've got gigawatts of power in vehicles. I've got a 16 kilowatt battery in my home, but 75 kilowatts in my van that I can't use. How can we speed up that access to the vehicles? It just seems to be taking forever to allow us to do that.
That whole vehicle to grid environment and the consumer electronic policies are being looked at both at a federal level and a state level. With vehicles in particular, it's important to get a national approach, because vehicles are batteries on wheels. They're not just batteries in a home, so they actually do cross the borders. So it's important to get that national framework happening. There's a huge amount of work happening at the federal government level with working groups with the states on what those technical standards are, who the regulators should be, what the consumer protections should be, and importantly, what the grid interface should be. So it does feel slow, and I think that the consumer energy space always seems a bit like a second cousin to the big shiny toy space, which is the big generator and wind turbine space. Inevitably, as the consumer energy space brings specific consumer benefit to bills, it becomes more of a political appeal. So from a policy point of view, the work is being done at speed now. I don't know when I can tell you you're going to be able to export your vehicle battery to the grid, but it's on the plan, so it should happen. You can do that today in some areas, yeah.
Jean Blackley, question for Alan and Saul and Monique as communicators and influencers. The fundamental issue globally for this transition is a lack of political will. The vast majority of the world's educated population, for want of a better category, know we need to act and do this. My question for you is about changing the way we communicate. You know, people like Australians and most nations, people are moved by outrage and they're moved by financial impact on their wallet and their family's future. What annoys me about the climate movement and people who've got a voice to be heard about climate change is saying things like, oh, if we have 1 or 2 metres of sea rise, 350 million people are homeless, where's that going to go? Oh, we're going to lose the Great Barrier Reef. Polar bears will have nowhere to live. What impact does it have on anyone in this room that there's no polar bears and that they can no longer go and dive at the Great Barrier Reef? It doesn't make them outraged. It doesn't impact their wallet. They can't grasp 350 million people looking to immigrate. If we said to the people who aren't in this room from Borrandurra, 1 or 2 metres of sea level rise means you no longer have a beach on the Great Ocean Road. There's no beach. Your $3 million house is now no longer worth anything. You know, do we need to be making people more outraged about the personal impact on them, that Melbourne will have to build a lock at their heads to protect the nation?
I think this is the million or billion person question. Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. That was largely thought to be the book that launched the modern environmentalist movement. Earth Day sort of was a reaction in 1970 to that moment. She wrote the most spectacular children's book just after that, and almost nobody knows it exists. She wrote a love letter to her 4-year-old about how the 4-year-old needs to, you know, walking along the coastline in Maine and exploring the pippies and the crabs and the importance of children being in touch with nature. That led to a big push in America and around the world to expose children to national parks and to get them out of the Bronx and New York City so that they had some relationship with the environment. I think the tragedy of this question is we have largely failed at this project. Most people have a David Attenborough, Jane Goodall relationship with nature now, which is a charming thing that is in a long-form documentary that, and you see it once a year and you're like, oh, it'd be nice if we keep some of that, but it precisely doesn't really interact with most people's daily lives. You know, in my local community, we already see it. The roads we live on the side of a mountain. There's 15% more moisture in the air for every degree Celsius of temperature rise. So we are getting biblical rain, you know, 3 times a year instead of once a decade. And so all the roads are washing away and the city council is struggling with just keeping the roads and footpaths up. And it's going to be a lot of these types of local effects. And to your point, you're going to have to, like Melbourne becomes the Netherlands. Like it'll be locks if you wish to keep it as it is. And we aren't communicating that well. the problem is, and you accused me because I also know all of Alan's facts and they're horrific big facts, because it's very hard. I'm not on home ground today. I mean, I can't tell you the story for things. One of the problems is we just have a lack of climate communicators. We don't need one Saul Griffith, and we need 10,000, and we need 10,000 Allens and 10,000 Elizabeths, and they need to be in every community. Hopefully people here are going to be doing that. But I think to Alan's point, fossil has an easy game. Just make it suspect and make staying the course sound easy. And we have a nearly impossible game.
In fact, most of the outrage seems to be on the other side now. I mean, in the sense that people, whenever I write about climate change, I get outraged emails and remarks. People are outraged that we're doing this and we're just destroying our economy. For what? For nothing. And there are two types of people. There are those who believe that it's all crap, and the others who believe that Australia won't make any difference, so why do anything? Which is like littering, it's like...
Well, let me tie this to this question. I 100% agree. Your question was rambling because you're struggling with the complexity of the whole thing. And our answer is struggling because we're struggling with the complexity of the whole thing. But at the root of your question, you said we react to outrage and we react to that. And I would say the problem is we have not yet had anyone stand up globally and say with love, we absolutely have a shot on goal of building a better world here, right? Not one single leader of any nation has yet stood up and said, there's a path to victory here, we'll contain the worst of climate. If we treat it like a wartime emergency, we can, by 2035, China's production of solar and batteries and EVs alone, if it keeps doubling at the rate it is, the whole world could be electrified by 2038. Right? So we have the industrial capacity, we have the scale, it's the geopolitics, it's the local stories, but we don't have any politician willing to stand up and stake their career on, I can take you to a better place. No one has yet tried communicating the big love story, and I would like to see that.
We don't have any more time for questions, and I'm going to have to wrap this up. My answer to your question is this. This is a psychological battle, but as you've heard from all of us today, it's also a communications battle. The psychological battle is that the human condition is that we don't want to hear the bad news. We block it out. And I can tell you from my medical career that denial is the most extraordinary human ability, in that we all have a great ability to know this as a fact, but to not think about it or allow it to affect the decisions that we make on a daily basis, so that we can hold two things in our minds: what we know to be true and how we'd like it to be. And so the people in this room are driven by the fact that they're a little bit more able to respond to what they know to be true than most people. But we still have an ability to deny that when we decide what to have for dinner or how we're going to cook it. So what we do need is political action. In this country, we have a government which says that it believes in climate change and is committed to acting on it, and then makes decisions which are completely at odds with that. And we have to change the government's actions and decision-making in such a way that at that level, it will do what we know that it needs to do, while we're all dealing with those two truths in our own minds. And the challenge is that every person in this room and every person who attends this meeting today understands what we need to do. And then we need to push forward both in our own space, at a local government space, at a state government space, and a federal level, and globally, to push for action on that. Now, we've seen again and again that our governments won't always do that for us. All of us have to act in our own space as best we can. My responsibility is to try and come up with a group of people who at a federal level can work together to push the government to do more. That's very clear. Federal government that we have is not acting as well as it can. Elizabeth's job at a state level is to act within the public service as best she can to push forward on that space as well. Alan's is to communicate to people who are always going to have this massive pushback around it. You're going to have it. That we can do this, and that there is a positivity to that, and there is the potential for action at a local, personal, community, state, federal, global level, that will make a difference. And Saul's responsibility is to act both at an Australian federal level and in the states to push that message as well. Now, our time has come to a close, and I would really, really very sincerely like to thank our three panellists for their time. It's not a small thing for them to be here today.